Okay, I hope it's all better now. I was having some problems with my audio, but I hope everyone is doing well. Our apologies for the delay. We were making sure that everyone was here. But thank you all so much for taking your time to coming to the first ever online United Women Conference. I will try to make the speech really quick because I know that all of you are very eager to hear what our four speakers today have planned. Just to introduce myself, my name is Ekaterina. I'm a junior at the International School of Panama, and I'm also the president of the United Women Club. United Women is an organization that first came to reality in the year of 2018, and it became a tradition in this club to organize an annual conference in order to spread awareness regarding gender equality, to break the stigma surrounding some of the most incredible and most important topics that are not talked about enough in our world. Today, we have four outstanding speakers who will be speaking on the silence of some of the most global topics and most important issues regarding gender inequality. During their speeches, I invite you, the audience, to type in your questions into the Q&A feature as we will be dedicating time after the conference, sorry, not after the conference, after each of the speakers in order to answer all of them. I am now very proud to present the first speaker of today, a regional technical officer for the International Labor Organization who has worked on youth-related projects on the organization through policy advice and the coordination of a national project in Panama in order to help vocational youth and gender equality. I am very proud to present Maaret.
Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. I will share my screen. So first of all, I wanted to say thank you. Thank you to United Women for this opportunity to reach out to you and to tell you about an issue that is, well, a global issue. It's about what we call the NEET youth that are neither in education, employment, or training. These are a group of young people that are considered discouraged in terms of not looking for employment, not looking to be educated, not looking to actually advance. So we're wondering, why is that happening? Is it good or is it bad? What are the reasons behind that? So if we think about our world, the world is actually a very young place. There are about 1.2 billion people between the age of 15 and 24. And if we raise the age a little bit to the age of 30, it's actually half of the world population that is young. Actually, this world is a very young place, and we are not doing enough to ensure that young people living in the world actually feel safe and with the tools to advance in life. Globally, about 70 million young people are looking for a job. This can be good, this can be bad, depending on the region and what are your chances in life. What is a bit more worrisome is that 160 million young people are working. That is good, but they are living in poverty. That is living with less than $3.10 a day. And many of them have families to maintain. And about 1/5 of the world population, that is 270 million young people, are neither in employment, education, or training. So what's happening here? But it's good to note that school enrollment is on an upswing. That is, more young people are in school and fewer youth are working or looking for a job. And this is good. That means that people are staying longer in education, they are acquiring better skills, they are more proficient in what they want to do. So that means that when they enter the labor market, there will be a very skilled pool of young people. And that is good for the world, good for our economies, good for productivity, good for the persons to actually achieve their dreams. Because if you think of a person wants to be productive in whatever path they choose, and they want to fulfill professional milestones, and actually they want to thrive in life. So one wants, whatever path you choose, you should be able to choose it in a way that you feel secure and with the tools to advance. And the youth to the employment of a young population actually varies per regions, and we should always look at these statistics with a bit of a cynical eye, or like with interrogating always, having questions, posing questions. If we look at Latin America and the Caribbean, we can see that about 40% of young people are working, and you would think, well, this is very good. But actually, perhaps it's not that good. It means that people don't have the means to stay longer in education, to actually complete the educational goals they wanted. So they need to enter the labor market earlier, or other reasons they enter the labor market earlier because of reasons of taking care of their families, or they start a family early, or issues, geographical issues, that there is not a school close by and they don't have the means to live in another city, etc. But and also, if we look at numbers, out of 23 employed men in Latin America, 16 are employed women. So that means that there are less women working than men, and that is actually a number that we should work upon. We look at other regions like Northern Africa or other Arab states, you see that the ratio is smaller, but then it's because there are less women working and there are more men working. Actually, there are a very, 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 very little number of women working. And other countries will have a decent mix, but also because of school desertion. So who are these young people that are considered neither in education, employment, or training? But many a case, these people that you see, that you feel that they are doing they're not doing anything, and they're actually perhaps watching TV or playing video games. Actually, well, it's not all of them like that. They're very much stigmatized by society, and we should always ask why before running to conclusions. And there's a bad tendency to actually demonize these people and consider them lazy and consider them people that don't contribute. But actually, their reasons are varied, and most of them is because they're women and they are engaged in household chores, and many of them have a low educational attainment, and there's a variety of reasons. They don't have the economical means, school was not attractive enough for them, or they have an disability issue that was hard for them to continue education and harder for them to even enter training for a job. So there are a variety of reasons. And why is it important to understand these reasons? Because then we have informed conversations. What are the circumstances that compelling these young people to choose this path? And to people working in policymaking or advising policymakers is to tell them, listen, well, you need to adjust this or this policy, or you need to start looking at this number or developing this kind of statistics, understanding what are the numbers behind. So actually these young people are not staying behind, because actually young people are the ones that will take care of us in the future through social protection floors, establishments, etc. What are these elements? Well, many a case is the lack of skills, is the lack of training, the lack of education. Everybody knows the case of a young person that wants to enter the labor market but doesn't have enough training or enough job experience, so it's harder for them to find a job. So it's a bit of a vicious cycle that we should break. And also, we said it already, that was not enough. There were no means to complete education. Poverty, gender, and early pregnancy are very, very strong elements causing the situation, compelling young people to become needs. That is, if you start a pregnancy early, that means that you fall out of school because you cannot, for a variety of reasons, basically that you're taking care of the child, you cannot continue your education. And because you don't have education and you're busy with family care activities, you cannot go into employment, or if you go, it's very sporadic and very low level, and well, hard to continue education. And this is because there's a lack of care facilities for children or the elderly. I was well, we're talking about this case about this girl that was already 22, and for the last 10 years she had been taking care of her grandmother, because it was expected from her, because she was the girl of the family, she was the sister of the boys. There was 3 or 4 boys and 1 girl, and the mother was working, so she had to take care of the grandmother. What happened here? They cut her wings. She was not able to continue education, and through that she was not able to enter a job. And eventually, if she does enter a job, it will be a very basic, and she will not feel comfortable with the self-esteem to actually go pursue an education that she wants. Perhaps she will not have even the economical means for this. And well, the economic situation, as we have commented, actually is an important factor. An economic situation can be a simple issue as not having the money for the bus fare, not having money to eat when you are at school, or just simply that there is not actually, and there are cases, sadly, that don't even have the proper shoes, so they don't actually even dare to ask for a placement, for example, in a vocational training school or something like this. So why should we worry about NEET youth? Why is it such an important issue? Because, well, not being in education, training, or employment puts the young person at risk. Imagine that you're not able to study, you're not able to work, you're just, in a way, you feel so useless. It starts affecting your self-esteem. It starts, especially among women, causing problems of mental health. If you're very alone and we have 2 or 3 children or taking care of the elderly and you don't know, you don't have the training, it puts you in a very vulnerable position. And for example, boys, many a case it drives them to look for a not that ethical way out to well, get a means for living. So in many cases, this perpetuates poverty. And poverty at the end of the case, well, it perpetuates many other things. Perpetuates a culture of not pursuing education, of not being able to keep a job, of, well, a variety of issues. And, well, the contribution of these young people is that the contribution to the economy is lost. And we don't think about the economy as just productivity or money. We think about people achieving their dreams, are growing professionally through their work. So we're talking about growth through a job creation. And if there's no the economic growth should go hand in hand with job creation. If there's no job creation, then the economy suffers too. And the most important thing, it shatters dreams. We all have a right to dream. We all have a right to pursue our dreams. And with these opportunities are shattered, we shattered many, many things also in our society. So how many NEET are there in the world? Well, we just saw it in the numbers earlier. It was 270 million. In the LAC region, that is Latin America and the Caribbean, 13.3% of women and men 6.1%. Actually, globally, one out of every 5 young people are NEETs. And of this, out of every 4 NEETs, 3 of them are women. So this is not something that we can actually think of lightly. And what about Panama? How are they classified? Well, this is in Spanish, but anyway. So we had stay-at-home moms, about 60%, people with a disability or unable to work, almost 3%, other inactives, and people out of the labor force, about 23%. But in 2017, the numbers are changed. There are 50%, that is almost 10 percentage point less of people being stay-at-home moms. But that doesn't mean that the situation has actually improved, because actually it means that many of them try to enter the labor market, but they are not able to enter the labor market because they don't have the job experience and they don't have the education. So what can we do? Well, there are a variety of schemes that we should demand and we should know of too. But the most important for policymakers is to support school to work transition, because it's important to understand that this moment is crucial and it's very important in the moment of a young person and a young person's life. The access to quality apprenticeships, there is apprenticeships that are happening through a contract, happening with a very clearly set out list of duties and responsibilities, a living wage. So people can learn very important skills in real time and actually enter quicker the labor market with the actual high level skills. Youth entrepreneurship and self-employment schemes are important to support. Job counseling services go through, well, listen, you could acquire a bit more training in this issue. I will help you find the proper training, or providing enough support, for example, for those who cannot travel, or actually just internship schemes, etc. Care facilities, ensuring that young women that have little children or those that are taking care of the elderly can leave them at a care facility while they go to work or go to training or go to study. And explore approaches that are here to stay. That is green jobs, digital skills. Actually, well, I know that it's embedded in young people to ensure digital skills, but actually, if you feel that no digital skills are being learned, please make an effort to learn digital skills, because these are the future. Consider youth in fragile situations. There are many elements affecting the situation. So what what can from one's position do? Transitioning to the formal economy, let's try to support formal economy so it's easier to support social protection floors, and through social protection floors, care facilities for children and the elderly. um, when working policy making, that in the rural economy, young people actually are not out of work for a long time because it's very cyclic in the rural economy. Young people working in hazardous occupations, that they usually have the equipment to not to be at risk, or the less at risk possible. And of course, as I said, social protection floors, that is ensuring care facilities in all cases for so all people can enter employment and training. What can we do to contribute? Well, it's a question we can ask ourselves, but you can think of supporting an organization that helps young pregnant or young adolescent moms to access training or education. You can also, when you look for a job, ensure that the when you work where you work actually does care of young people and ensures care facilities. If you become an entrepreneur, consider the situation of young people that have a difficult time accessing the labor market, considering opening uh, how you call it, quality apprenticeship schemes, or just think there's always a way that we can contribute to the situation of young people. If you could become policymakers, of course, to consider how to always question the statistics behind how you understand them from the quality side, and how can you well, through your work, contribute to the well-being of also young people transitioning from school to work. Well, this is my presentation for today. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Maaret, for your amazing speech. We will now be moving into the question section of the speech. So we have received a couple of questions. I'll be just reading them and it'll be kind of like an interview style, and then you can go ahead and answer them. So first of all, one of the problems, I know you talked about it a lot in your speech, but how can we help needs? So for example, imagine that you are like a student in ISP, you're still in high school. How can we be active in helping this global issue?
Well, I think that what you're doing right now with this session is very important. Raising awareness on the situation, global issues, it's a very important element. The way to help people with that suffer from stigma is understanding what's the reason. What's the reason for the stigma? We could see in the statistics for employment that actually numbers can be misleading if you don't understand what are the specific situations behind them or the reasons behind them. So it's always about a question, and also look what's around you and what can you do to help young people. As I said, well, there are a couple of organizations that work with young women, young pregnant teenagers, and how can you volunteer? What can you do to support these women is very important.
Great, thank you. And another question similar to what you were talking about with the stigma surrounding this issue, but how do we break the stigma? Because I know it's such a complex topic.
Well, yeah, actually, this is a very complex topic, and that is a very, very nice question. How can we break the stigma? Well, actually, not surrounding needs. How do we break stigma in general? Well, we first of all we inform ourselves, and it's good to start questioning. Question everything behind. If you see as I commented, if you see a young person doing nothing, ask why is that young person doing nothing? Perhaps I'm running to conclusions too quickly. Perhaps that person has looked for a job for months and has found nothing, and is just completely discouraged. So try to read, try to understand, and see from your every national context is different. So see what can you do from your sphere of action to raise awareness on this issue.
Definitely. Yeah, I think it's just so important to open our minds about it and be aware that this is the situation that many people are in, which I think is just so important. Another question that we received is, why is this problem so prominent, specifically in Panama, in your opinion?
Thank you. I could go on, but I'm going to be very quick about this. The situation is very prominent in Panama because we have forgotten youth. Actually, I'm going to be very straight about this. We have forgotten to invest in education. We have forgotten how to ensure proper job counseling services for young people. We have forgotten that the education also needs to stay up to date, so it's interesting for young people. Young people, many a case, leave education because it's not providing them with what they need, and it's not enchanting or attractive. So they say, okay, I'm going to look for a job. So they look for a job, perhaps they will not find it, or perhaps they will end up being working poor. And many a case also, well, we know that in Panama, early pregnancy, teen pregnancy is a real issue. So it's working about raising awareness about sexual education as well in this sense.
That's great. And just a little sneak peek for some of our future sections, we are having a speaker talk about sexual education. So if anyone's interested, I really encourage all of you to come. But another question that we got, I know that it was answered in the chat, which is you guys should go ahead and check that out. But what kind of organizations in Panama, but also worldwide, help the NEET youth?
Actually, there was a two organization in Panama. I just forgot the name. Was it Vida Luz y Vida? I think it was. I promised I will look for the name of the organization. I mean, I have actually I've been in seminars with them too, and it just blanked. But I promise I will send the name to United Women so they can pass them on to you.
Perfect. That would be great. And then our last question is, how can we help bring more technology into the country and push the programming to improve tech skills in the youth at risk?
Well, I think it's all about where we are standing. But definitely, it's important to talk about your educational institution, or perhaps organizing groups, or perhaps connecting through an NGO to improve programming and all this. Definitely, I understand this concern, and even myself having a little kid, I'm also thinking like, oh gosh, I really would like to know what skills to give her, digital skills. And definitely, well, asking, I think, your educational institution to support you in this path, I think it's very important. Thank you.
Well, that brings us to an end to this Q&A session. Thank you so much for your time and for presenting this
Thank you.
such informative speech. We
Thank you
will
for this opportunity.
Of course, thank you. We will now be moving on to our next speaker, and that is a junior from ISP who's also a founder of the Best Buddies program in our school. And she's going to be speaking on the issue of the lack of female education worldwide. And although she's currently traveling, she was able to pre-record a video, so we will be going ahead and sharing the screen with it. But I'm very proud to present Camila right now.
The best investment in life is in education. Hundreds of years ago, women had absolutely no opportunities in school. You would hope that now in the 21st century, years and years later, that would be over. Unfortunately, however, that is not the case. Progress does not equal solution, and we should never treat it as such. Now, I'm going to make an assumption. I'm going to say that those of us here today are the lucky ones. I can assume that you're watching today's conference on a phone, a TV, a computer. I can assume that most of us here today were able to get at least some sort of an education to be able to work for some of these things. You know, I would say and I believe with all of my being that this should be a human right. You know, the right to improve your quality of life, the right for those living in poverty to not have to be stuck in a cycle, the right to better yourself, the right of experience, the right of opportunity. Yet in today's day and age, after so many years of constant pushing for equality, we are still the lucky ones for having access to this education. So let's clear one thing up. We may be the lucky ones in this topic, we may be able to get an education, and even most people we know were probably able to get an education. But that is not where reflection on this topic should end. Gender inequality is your issue too. Whether you aren't a woman, whether you did get an education, we cannot move on from this issue just because we have been lucky. Society seems to move past issues that are not relevant to their personal lives. Yet, if you ignore these issues, you're part of the problem. So let's listen. According to UNESCO, there are 132 million girls around the world that are completely out of school. This includes 34.3 million out of primary school, 30 million out of middle school, and 67.4 million out of secondary school. Reflect on that for a second. Deeper than this, let's remember that when I speak of education for women, I am not only referring to their access to some form of school, I am also referring to the safety for these girls. 60 million girls are sexually assaulted on their way to or at school every year. Lots of these cases appear in countries full of poverty. In these countries, dropout rates are significantly higher. So now, I'd like you to insert yourself into the shoes of one of these girls. Imagine yourself with the same hopes and dreams that you have now, constantly being torn down. I remember when I was in kindergarten here at ISP, the whole grade was asked one question: what did we want to be when we grew up? I had to take the day to wonder, how could I be asked that so young when there were so many possibilities? I would have to narrow a million down to the one I wanted. I could do whatever. My parents would say, you can be whoever you want to be. These girls just want the same. They just want an opportunity to do better, an opportunity to change their life. Yet, they don't have a million opportunities like some of us here today. Perhaps they're only given one choice and they must settle. But we must not settle for what they get. We must fight for them as we have been given the opportunity to. Now, I could unfortunately go on and on about the facts, but at the end of the day, I am here to make a difference, even if it is for one single girl around the world. One girl isn't as little as you may think. One girl being able to get an education means a whole lifetime of opportunity for her that she wouldn't get otherwise. This should not be overlooked. If all of us aim to do this, we can make a significant change together. So what can we do? The first step is to support organizations fighting for women's education. Just to name a few, the Campaign for Female Education, or CANFED, describes itself as a Pan-African movement and works to multiply the amount of girls in school while providing them with new opportunities for leadership. According to Charity Navigator, CANFED has allowed over 3.3 million students to attend school in Zimbabwe, Zambia, Ghana, Tanzania, and Malawi since 1993. We can donate, volunteer, and participate in nearby activities to support them. The American Association of University Women, or AAUW, is another amazing organization dedicated to break educational and economic barriers for women across the world through advocacy, education, and volunteer work. Each and every one of you could make a difference today by becoming members of the organization, just like me. Anyone can do this, and it only takes about 2 minutes on their website. Once a member signs up, the organization will send them notices whenever their advocacy is needed. I highly encourage any and everyone to sign up. A separate way to contribute is to support the adoption of feminist foreign policy in our home countries. We can do this from our homes. It all starts with us. A feminist foreign policy is defined as a policy of a state that considers its interactions with other states in a way that prioritizes peace, gender equality, and environmental integrity. This also seeks to take away and replace colonial, racist, patriarchal, and male-dominated power structures. Today, only 5 countries, being Sweden, Canada, France, Luxembourg, and Mexico, have adopted this policy, yet if we fight for it, our countries will listen and might just do the same. So to conclude my speech today, I want everyone to once again consider everything that was said today by myself and everyone else giving speeches. We have so much to work on in the world, but let's start right here, today. The story of female education and progress is not over, so let's work together to create a better ending. Thank you.
Even though she's not here, I would like to thank Camila for that captivating speech. It's truly so important to be and educate ourselves surrounding this topic. Unfortunately, we will not be taking questions due to the fact that she's not here, but we will be moving on to our next speaker, who is Maya, and she's going to be talking about a minority mentality and her experience of growing up in an Israeli small minority community and her experience of living there while being a woman.
Okay, so hello and welcome all. My name is Maya, and today I'm going to be speaking to you about discrimination against women within minority communities and groups, specifically in the Middle East. Since there are a lot of stigmas surrounding women in the Middle East, I would like to be able to give you an alternative perspective and challenge the stereotype of Arab women as we're perceived globally today. To give some background on me, I'm from Israel, I'm Arab Israeli. I'm part of a religious minority called the Druze. The Druze is an Arab minority in the Middle East located in Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and Israel. The Druze is an Arab minority, the religion was developed in 986 AD, and although branched from Islam, the Druze religion has a mix of different religious influences, such as Hinduism, Christianity, Judaism, as well as Islam. We usually live in small villages, preferably in locations of high altitude. I myself grew up for most of my life in a Druze village called Resifia, which is in the Kerman Mountains in Israel. Ever since I was a little girl, I always felt underrepresented in global media and in general. There are growing movements and progress in regards to female leadership initiatives in my own communities and in communities similar to mine. However, it's still a growing field that I wasn't extremely exposed to growing up. So, speaking at this conference was my way of finally bringing in my perspective in terms of gender inequality. Because I feel that in the fight for injustice, we seem to forget the women whose voices have been silenced, whether by their own communities or by the world, due to stereotypes. As a person with a platform and opportunities to share and educate in events like these, I feel it to be my duty to speak for the women who feel that they can't, because we should be fighting for all women, and minority women should be included. Minority mentality is the reason why I'm speaking to you all today. It's the title I gave to the speech and to a phenomenon that I've observed within myself and others coming from small communities. The feeling that if you don't tell your story, it will not be told. So I'm here to not only tell my story, but hopefully tell the story of many other women in the process. The story of the impact of stereotypes and what they've taken from so many. In a global context, stereotypes are often plastered on the foreheads of Arabs and Middle Easterns in general, and especially women. Western society depicts Arab women as helpless and submissive, and Middle Easterns in general as violent and hazardous. This happens through the news, film and entertainment, mainstream media, and in our everyday lives. Even though this type of gender inequality that the world generalizes is true for some parts of the Middle East, there are still many thriving areas or even smaller areas whose women don't fit that stereotype. For example, although I come from a village with a religious community, we still have and always have heavily encouraged women to go seek higher education and have completely normalized working mothers and two parental income houses. So, understanding that much of what is known about the Middle East and Arab misogyny is based on a generalization and based on stereotypes will bring us one step closer to truly being able to include all women in the conversation. We can't simply fall into stereotypes and dismiss the real struggles that are beyond the surface. We have to dive deeper to actually understand different types of misogyny beyond our own and beyond the ones that we're familiar with. To truly be allies and feminists, we need to be able to fight for all women, including those with no ability to do so for themselves. Like mentioned before, the way that women's rights in the Middle East are viewed globally is based on generalizations and stereotypes. But stereotypes do often come from a truth. There are many Arab communities in which by law women do not have the same rights as their male counterparts. However, this is not true for the whole region. Many countries that are considered more backwards in their ideologies have started to grant women more and more rights. Like, for example, Saudi Arabia, allowing women to register for several types of documentation, such as passports, marriage and divorce licenses, travel, and own businesses without the consent of a male guardian. Morocco passed an act of protection for survivors and victims of sexual assault in 2018, and was then followed by Jordan, Lebanon, and Tunisia, who recently came out of a heavy dictatorship and now get to enjoy the freedoms of a democratic government. That same democratic government has been working to guarantee human rights for all, including improving and implementing more laws to protect and ensure women's rights. Of course, there's more to be done, and even these laws that have been passed must be further amended. However, it's important to recognize that change is happening whether we see it or not. And we must expect change, but reward progress in order for this progress to continue. Alongside recognizing the continuous change, we must also acknowledge that there are already thriving communities that go unheard of. These communities' struggles in terms of gender inequality are different than what the stereotype implies and than what we just looked at. It's more social than it is literal. Upon research, one will find that there are key factors that will most likely determine how mobile the women of that community are. The primary one being the financial or economic factor. It relies and is affected by many other factors, and that is why it's so complex. It can be affected by the poverty or wealth of the country or the resources that the country has available. It's also affected by the country's social infrastructure, so talking about the ideologies and religious status. This is where the stereotype will also fall short in recognizing the real issue. Although Arabs are seen as conservative and closed-minded societies, especially in terms of women's rights and leadership, this is not true for all. According to a very large-scale and detailed survey that was carried out by the BBC through a research network called the Arab Barometer, most people supported having female prime ministers and female presidents. And it's not only opinions and thoughts of approval and support that these communities are voicing, but the women themselves are also breaking barriers and participating in leadership positions, such as being diplomats and ambassadors. All of these aspects, both social and economic, heavily affect the minority groups and communities of the region. Minorities will typically have their unique values, be it religious, cultural, national, or in general, that differ in some way from the general region or country that they're located in. But their environment will still affect them even subconsciously. For example, in countries like Syria and Iraq, the Christian minorities need to adapt and become more conservative in their traditions and culture. So although the religion does not forbid or restrict women in terms of customs, the women are still more traditional and backward. There are fewer opportunities for them, and they are unable to participate in things like politics that are considered male-dominant fields. They're also less likely to live alone or be independent, along with them being restricted or having to restrict themselves in terms of movement and mobility for their own safety. An opposite example, however, is Muslims in places like Lebanon. Since the country's dominant religion is Christianity, the Muslim community is somewhat a minority with the modern Lebanese Christian society. For them to adapt, they have become more open-minded and flexible in matters of traditions and beliefs. An additional example of this is within my own community. Despite being a more neutral and accepting religion on its own, the Druze community is very affected by the modernity of urban Israel and Israel as a whole. So our communities, especially those closer to urban areas, are less traditional and very modern in terms of women's rights. So to further understand the way that gender inequality in these minority communities works, looking at the way the country operates can give us a good insight into what that will look like. Along with observing the community itself, will help us piece together the events that take place and the type of misogyny that is in place. So now that you know all this, what will you do? I hope that from this, you all now have the necessary tools to further dissect and analyze stereotypes that you come across, whether that's towards your own identity or others. I want you all to challenge yourselves to look deeper and not simply accept what you're given. Every time that we give into stereotypes is a time that we are dismissing the true problem. Stereotypes pollute the way we see other people and cultures and stop us from really understanding them. When we see people who operate differently, we refuse to lend a hand because they're not moving as fast as we would want. So I urge you all to challenge yourselves and take a closer look than you usually would at these issues. We need to fight for change, but respect the natural process. Patience is key. So we have to take it upon ourselves to have a deeper understanding of these issues if we really want to see change. And it is only when we will truly be able to speak for these silenced women. If anything, they deserve at least that. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that speech. I know that it was very, very interesting to listen, and especially because this is you coming from that community, it makes it so much more personal. We will now be going into a Q&A session, so same thing as we did with Maaret. We got a couple of questions. So first of all, just a very broad one. How did growing up in a minority group change your perspective of the world?
So when I grew up for most of my life within my community, and I only moved when I was in middle school in 7th grade. So for me, a lot of the things that we went through, both as women and as a minority, were kind of normalized and were things that everybody within the community went through. So they were things that everybody was used to. And to me, like as a kid, they didn't seem abnormal. But it wasn't until I actually moved and I got to go to international schools and look at different cultures and how different cultures operate when I realized like that some of the things that we had normalized weren't normal in other communities. And being from a minority community gives me a perspective when I'm looking at these issues, for example, because it makes me want to learn about more of these issues the way that I also want people to learn about my communities and communities similar to mine. So yeah.
Great. That's really interesting how you kind of have like this completely different lens that many of us don't have. I think that's really interesting. Another question that we got is, this is a bit more personal, but how have these stigmas personally impacted you?
So personally, when I moved, there were kind of a lot of assumptions about, because both I'm Israeli and because I'm Arab Israeli, in which like not a lot of people kind of understand that combo as a whole. But there were always a lot of kind of both stigmas and people being curious about that aspect. So sometimes people would kind of assume things or about my identity or about things that I might have gone through because I'm Middle Eastern, and which sometimes weren't true or sometimes were extreme. But a lot of the time, like I have also come in contact with people who genuinely were just curious, people who never met somebody from that background and just genuinely wanted to learn more. And in the beginning, I kind of saw it as like I have to explain to people every time, like, oh, it's not always like that. But with time, I started to see it as an educational opportunity to like teach people about my culture and teach people about what like it actually means to be Arab, to be Middle Eastern. So
Definitely. I love how you're kind of taking the questions as a call to action, if that makes sense. You're not seeing that as like an attack, if that makes sense, as in a questioning, but it's you informing people, and I love that. Another question that we had is, there are two very similar ones, but as a person who doesn't have that big of a platform, how can we help with this issue?
So definitely just like trying to be educated and like always asking questions. So when you see, when we're talking about the example that I just made about gender inequality within the Middle East, people will dismiss it as, oh, women don't have rights and kind of move on. But when you dismiss it to that, you're then dismissing the other issues that go on that are not that, the more social issues that go on, because you're just dismissing it for women don't have rights or for the stereotype. So definitely when just researching and looking into these things would definitely be a big pro, because just by you being informed and informing the people around you, if every person took a second to like be a little more informed, and then inform the people around them, then we can all benefit from each other. So
That's great. Thank you so much for your time. It's not a question, but we did have a comment in the Q&A that thank you so much for this presentation. The person have learned a lot, and I know that that is coming from all of us. It's truly, your speech is fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing it. We will now be moving along with our next speaker, and for our next and last speaker of today, we have Clara, and she's going to be talking about the topic of menstruation, and she hopes that with her speech, she'll be able to take measures towards eradicating menstruational taboos and stigma. So Clara, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you so much. Hi, my name is Clara, and I just want to thank the United Women for inviting me. I'm super excited. So for the 15 to 20 minutes I have here, today is all about expanding our perspectives. And specifically, the topic that I'll discuss has changed the way I view the world around me and myself. Menstruation is a classic symbol of a woman's physical health and fertility. Nonetheless, stigma, shame, indignity, silence, and taboos surround menstrual cycles. Considering how much motherhood is praised, the attitude towards menstruation is a paradox. Despite representing half of the population, women's necessities are often overlooked, neglected, sometimes even deliberately ignored. Also, during this talk, I would like to make it very clear, it is important to note that not only cisgendered women and girls menstruate, but also trans men, gender non-binary, and intersex individuals do as well. And of course, not all women menstruate. I grew up probably in the most open-minded liberal household you can find out there. I mean, I didn't know what soda was till age 6, and I only ate Annie's mac and cheese because it was the healthier option in the grocery store. And of course, my parents were art students. I mean, what more could you expect? But when I got my first period, instead of celebrating being a woman, I painfully cried. And you would wonder why, thinking about the kind of environment I had around me. For both the menstruators and the non-menstruators in this Zoom, here are a few things I've learned about menstruation and the taboos and shame built upon it. For starters, though, we actually need to know what menstruation is. Most adults still have junior high level of education about sexual health in the female body. Men and women are typically still operating with whatever they remember from the socially awkward sex ed class they had in school, if they were even lucky enough to have sex ed at all. Most sex educators emphasize 2 practical points with the goal of preventing unintended pregnancies. Having a period means a girl can get pregnant, and having sex leads to pregnancy. This knowledge gap doesn't usually close until later in life when cycle specifics become more important. This can happen when a couple is actively trying to have a baby, when pregnancy doesn't come easily, or when a partner develops a medical condition that affects their menstrual cycle. Statistically speaking, around one in every 7 women you encounter is on their period right now. So for all the men here, you need to take extreme consideration as to what periods are. It affects your relationship with your mother, your sister, your girlfriend, your coworker, etc. Now we need to kind of know the biology of it. Menstruation is commonly referred to as a period, and it's a process where every month for 3 to 8 days, you bleed and push out the inner lining of the uterus from the vagina. Menstruation is not as virulent as it seems. It's a cycle that occurs in order to prepare the body for pregnancy. In order to understand the process of menstruation, we first have to have a general knowledge of the female body. The female reproductive system counts for 2 ovaries. These are the organs that store and release the eggs. The fallopian tubes, the narrow tube that carries the egg from the ovary to the uterus, where the pregnancy develops, the cervix that connects the vagina to the uterus, and finally the vagina, the canal where the menstruation comes out of the body. Your cycle uses hormone signals as cues for what to do next. In the first part of your cycle, one of your ovaries prepares to release an egg. It also produces an increasing amount of the hormone estrogen. And estrogen helps grow and prepare the lining for your uterus, the endometrium, for potential pregnancy. After your ovary releases an egg in the process of ovulation, it produces the hormone progesterone. Progesterone also helps prepare the uterus for a possible pregnancy, and it keeps the endometrium stable in your uterus, ready to receive a fertilized egg. Of course, if an egg is fertilized, it then travels to the uterus over to the next several days, implants in the uterine wall, and starts growing a hormone-producing placenta. But if by then your body doesn't receive a hormonal signal that a pregnancy is in progress, levels of estrogen and progesterone drop. This drop in hormones prepares your endometrium to shed and triggers the production of the hormone-like prostaglandins, which causes your uterus to contract, causing your period, and the cycle starts again every month. As a reminder for all the guys here, when asking questions directly to women, and especially to women you don't know or are getting to know, it's important to remember that she's heard it all before, and she knows exactly what the implication of your question is, no matter how subtly you're trying to ask it. Asking a woman if she's on her period when she's being emotional or during an argument is a great way to undermine whatever she's feeling, and a tacit acknowledgement that menstruation makes a woman's needs and desires frivolous or unworthy. So if you're going to ask a woman if she's on her period, you better be giving her chocolate or ice cream afterwards. Now we need to go to the historical part of taboos. There's no wonder primitive religions incorporated taboos around menstruation. I mean, without the proper understanding of its biological basis, menstruation looks really threatening. It's reoccurrent bleeding every 28 days without an apparent injury or wound. Even more confusing, menstruation only occurs in women, disappears during pregnancy, and stops at middle age. Menstrual taboos have dated back through pre-agricultural, pre-modern braid and probably likely pre-language, and menstrual taboos have dated through the 73 AD in the first Latin encyclopedia, and it reads along the lines, "Contact with menstrual blood turns new wine sour." This shows us the origin of menstrual taboos was basically universal and repeatedly practiced across different peoples and cultures around the world. Going back to why everyone's so scared to talk about it, there are a few interpretations. Freud said it was our fear of blood, but if that were actually the case, a surgeon would probably hold a TEDx conference today talking about nosebleed shame. So we can cross that one off. Cleland Ford postulated that menstrual taboo was developed because early societies knew of its toxic disease-causing effects. Of course, we know that menstrual blood is not toxic, but this view persisted in science through the 20th century. In 1920, the term menotoxin was made after concluding that flowers handled by menstruating nurses wilted quickly. It shouldn't be an act of feminism to know how your body works. But by learning these origins, by learning the history, we can more effectively combat their continuance. Now, why should what happened in 72 AD matter to us today? The stigma of menstruation has negative consequences for women's physical and mental health, sexuality, well-being, and social status. The menstruation taboo, like body shaming, is deeply ingrained, not only in society, but in individuals. I thought I was the only one. That's how effective the culture of shame is. Communication about menstruation, like other topics, is culturally constrained. Girls are usually taught to maintain silence about menstruation. There's a taboo that makes it socially unacceptable to talk about menstruation. The only way for girls and young women to talk about it is to complain about their menstrual symptoms. The communication taboo is supported by the existence of dozens of euphemisms for menstruation. I mean, who hasn't heard of Aunt Flo here? If there was no menstrual stigma, there would be no need for euphemisms, no reason to call it anything other than its formal name, menstruation. Stigmatized language creates a culture of shame and teaches women that getting a period stain in public is the most embarrassing thing that can happen to them. Menstrual products, for example, tampons and pads, are designed to absorb fluid and odors and not to be visible through one's clothes, to be small enough to carry obtrusively in one's purse, and to be discreetly discarded in the lined bin of a public restroom. Because menstruation continues to be presented as a taboo topic, product manufacturers characterize menstruation as a hygienic crisis that requires manufacturers' expert advice as to how to properly care for the menstruating body. An analysis on media of taboo-related words shows that advertisements of menstrual products reinforce the secrecy and taboo regarding menstruation. Moreover, they highlight the qualities of the product that mostly help consumers avoid shame and embarrassment. These cultural practices are emphasizing the message that women's bodies are unacceptable and need to be sanitized. In other words, menstruation must be kept under wraps. Women and young girls who menstruate are ostracized from basic activities like eating certain foods or socializing all over the world. The cultural shame attached to menstruation and shortage of resources stops women from going to school and working every day. Period poverty is a lack of access to sanitary products, menstrual hygiene education, toilets, hand washing facilities, and/or waste management. There's one case where a 16-year-old girl who lives only with her disabled father could not afford sanitary napkins, and with no proper education at home about how to handle her periods, she wrapped tissues on shoe insoles instead to make her own pads. She once bled for 3 weeks straight, only to find out later that she had a 20-centimeter lump on her uterus. Period poverty has a big impact on a woman's mental health, making them more prone to be anxious and depressed in their adult life. A study made on girls in Kenya showed that girls experiencing period poverty in low-income areas experience anxiety, low moods, fear of stigma, and embarrassment. Although the study mainly focuses on Kenyan girls, the claim isn't limited to that demographic. In fact, research conducted by Always, an American brand for menstrual products, suggested the same thing. It found that 39% of the participants who suffered from period poverty suffered from anxiety and depression. Once again, showing that the embarrassment and stigma around menstruation plays a big role in a woman's mental health and can lead them to develop mental illness. Now, finally, the part that everyone's been wanting, what can you do about it? It doesn't matter if you're borderline indecisive, I'm going to give you a question of choice. Speak up even though your words might not be welcomed or listened to, or stay silent, stay afraid. I want to further explain the term courage. The root of the word courage is cor, the Latin word for heart. In one of its earliest forms, the word courage basically meant to speak one's mind by telling all of one's heart. You have to be willing to be courageous because in the stigmas upheld for menstruation, vulnerability is the core of shame and fear, but the birthplace of connection and belonging. Telling your story is the start to change. We also need to understand that culture is not static. In finding entry points for change in practices related to the perception of menstruation, we can change the negative way society has been looking at menstrual health for the past centuries. We also need to know a bit about shame. Here, the approach to women's shame is articulated by Brené Brown, based on her interviews with 200 women and employed as a framework for understanding and resisting menstrual shame. In her analysis, women experience shame when they fail to meet extensive, layered, complex, and competing demands and expectations. Brown describes shame as an intensely painful experience of believing we're flawed and thus unworthy of acceptance and belonging. She observed that shame is experienced as a profound sense of inadequacy and often results in women avoiding social contact, leaving women feeling trapped, isolated, and powerless. In other words, feeling shame, women often hide from others to avoid further shame. And when we avoid talking about shame, shame unravels our connection with others. Because women feel so shameful about their bodies, they abstain from talking about their shared experience. In turn, this makes all women feel alienated in a society where normally bodily functions are not talked about except in a negative light. However, where a woman's shame intersects with another woman's experience, here's where we find an opportunity to make real change. Therefore, sharing our story is a strategy to establish connection. According to Brown, the greatest challenge to developing shame resilience is the way shame actually makes us less open to giving or receiving empathy. Shame is maintained because it is very difficult for women to access the antidote, connection and empathy. Empathy helps heal shame, and empathy comes from a community of people who are facing the same struggle. In Brown's later analysis, women's shame is often tied to isolation and secrecy, and interrupts women's sense of community and connection. Brown's perspective on shame resilience is that women should share their stories, including their pain with other women. Woman-to-woman connections can resolve shame, but menstrual shame undermines women's capacity to speak about menstruation and builds those necessary connections. And yet, finding the courage to speak about our experiences and anticipating and receiving empathetic responses are key to women's resilience to shame. Recognizing our shared experiences of shame can help us recognize our collective vulnerability, and women can come to realize that they're not alone, despite how much they feel like they are. Once shame is exposed as a sexist social construction, feminist activists urge women to break the taboo regarding talking about menstruation. If we all come to the conscious agreement that a period should not be silenced, women in low poverty regions and rural communities will be given easier access to pads, tampons, and sanitary hygienic spaces. Countless girls miss school while menstruating due to both lack of feminine hygiene products and the taboo. If we're able to openly speak about our menstrual cycles, it is way more likely that schools, organizations, and the government will address the non-issue to the people who should be concerned. Period poverty affects everyone, from teachers and sex ed, environmental activists and pollution, a country's economy, and more. It all starts with what you do to speak up for the deliberately ignored stigma. I urge you all to have or to continue to have uncomfortable conversations regarding menstruation, because the stigma isn't only perpetrated by some people, but all of us, even women, subconsciously feed into it. Menstruation surrounds us all, and the taboo around it affects us all. So be more conscious about what you say or what you don't say in fear of being shamed. Eradicating structures of systematic oppression is hard, but realize that you can do something about it. Don't stay silent when an entire community of women need help normalizing their own bodies and the way that they're talked about in a heavily patriarchal society. For the men in this Zoom, don't shame girls for going to the bathroom with a pad in their hand or awkwardly nod in your heads when the topic of menstruation is brought up. Make an effort to normalize the topic that has constantly been vilified. For the women in this Zoom, be courageous, share experiences, and share the shame you feel. Be the change society greatly needs, regardless how small you play a role in this too, all of you. So by the end of this, I hope you have your decision. Speak up, even though your words might not be welcomed or listened to, or stay silent, stay afraid. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Clara, for your speech. We will now be going into the Q&A session. We were able to receive a few. So why don't we go ahead and start off with the first one, which is, how can we support girls that don't already have a support system at home?
So I think that for that, you can just be very, conscious and try to be vulnerable with them. Like I said before, you really need to be courageous in the situation and kind of like act out. If you notice that a girl does not have the actual products, you can like totally buy her some, or if no, give her access to it and make her not feel uncomfortable when going to the grocery store. I mean, I know that I didn't buy my own products until like a few months ago because I was too ashamed to go. So you can definitely be like the mom in the situation, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. We need to support ourselves, and it's something that, even like between us girls, it's something that we're afraid to talk about. And I feel like it's just important to shatter that kind of wall around us. Another question that we received is, how can we help men learn more about menstruation?
Well, I think it all comes down to like them actually, like the whole thing about menstrual taboos is that people don't have the actual biological basis. So if you can actually teach the guys around you about it and just be more open about your period, I think that will fix a lot of things. Like not being ashamed of saying when your period is, or like if you are struggling with something, like asking for help, like being not, well, you just can't be shameful in that situation. It's like a normal function that it means that you're healthy. So you shouldn't be bothered by telling someone if you need help, or you shouldn't feel shameful when someone asks you a question. Keeping guys educated on it, and also understanding that there's some things that they just cannot say. Tell them that they're wrong in this situation.
Exactly. I agree. I agree with you on the fact that we need to be open about it. We also need to be the people. It's not like, oh, they don't get us, they don't anything like that. Because I feel like an important part is us sharing our experience and us, as I said before, it's just shattering that wall and being able to speak on a topic like this. Our last question is, how can we make ISP or any school in general a more inclusive community for girls regarding their periods?
So first of all, something that's been very difficult here in Panama is having sex ed. I remember when I was in 5th grade and I had my conversation about periods and stuff like that. We were put in different rooms and it was such an uncomfortable situation. The only thing people usually teachers usually talk about when they say menstruation is like that it's horrible, and we kind of need to stop that and like eradicate that idea. We actually have to educate ourselves on how our body works. Like I said, it shouldn't be an act of feminism to know. And also something I talked to ECAT about a little while back is that something I found really, really interesting is that you can only access period products usually in the nurse's office. And that kind of brings back the idea that it's something sickening and it's something, like unhealthy, even though it's something completely natural. I recommend talking about it openly to your administration, and also possibly bringing up proposals to have free pads and tampons in the bathrooms instead of going to the nurse's office.
Really, yeah, I 100% agree. I think those ideas are great. Our last question for today on your speech is, you talked a lot about bringing up this topic, but how do we actually bring it up to the table? How do we actually open the conversation?
That's a really good question. So I usually think that periods do get brought up to conversations, but it's never brought really in a positive light. We have to make people more aware of how many women are struggling, but we also have to say like, hey, this is like totally normal. Like this is just pure science, how our body works, shouldn't be that big of a deal. So I think that if you do want to make it heard, I think you should just start the conversation. You know, like I have this idea that like if I don't know how to say something, I just like say like 1, 2, 3 in my head. I go out and say it. You know, like you just have to be completely vulnerable in that situation, and like that's how connection's going to start.
Great. Well, thank you for your time. We have a comment in the Q&A session of how it was such a powerful talk. And I agree with that 100%. I know that you educated, but also kind of like motivated everyone in the audience, in the panelists. Just thank you so much for your time. And this brings us, of course, this brings us to our closure for the United Women Conference this day, the global issues topic. I am very excited to announce that we are having another conference. As you know, we have 4 sections of it. Our third conference is going to be happening next week, April 24th at the same time, 2 p.m. Panama time, and it'll be our Spanish section for it. And I would like to invite everyone here to attend it. Even though it's going to be in Spanish, we have some very, very exciting panelists and guest speakers coming. We have a former First Lady of Panama. We have an author, an entrepreneur, and more even extremely exciting speakers. So it would be great to have everyone here. But I would like to thank everyone for taking your time on coming here and educating yourself and being able to be a part of this movement. We all greatly appreciate it. And I know that just one small change like this conference can lead to an entire domino of changes. So yeah, just thank you so much. I hope all of you have an amazing rest of your day. Bye.